Okay, so we're going to try to show you how to do VLANs on a Cisco switch. Right? Now here's the network that's laid out just like in the assignment. We have 4 switches, 3 hosts connected to each switch, and the switches are all interconnected, right? All the PCs are set up to receive a DHCP address, so they're already configured for that. There is no server attached, so we're going to be looking at creating a DHCP pool on one of the switches and having it dole out IP addresses. But since they're all 3 connected to the same switch, we need a way to segment that switch, to break it apart into smaller VLANs, virtual local area networks. This saves us tons of money in equipment and allows us a little bit higher level of, let's say, security between the subnets. So marketing doesn't get to have the same IP addresses as accounting, and accounting doesn't get the same addresses as the admin staff. So it prevents any traffic across the network that we don't want to allow. So first things first, let's take a look at our switch. And we're going to do a little pre-planning here. So my red network is going to be a 192.168.1.0 network, class full, class C. The green network is going to be 192.168.2.0/24, right, class C. And the blue network is going to be 192.168.3.0, right, again, /24. So we'll look at the switch configuration here. We'll enable it and take a look at what is currently in there. Not much. It is a pretty clean install. There's no pools in there, no IP exclusions. The interfaces, no commands underneath them, nothing, right? So it is a brand new install, okay? Fresh out of the box, it's a dumb switch right now. We want to break that up into separate VLANs. So I'm going to show you one VLAN, and we're going to make sure it's up and running, and then I'll turn you loose on the other 2. So there's going to be a little bit of trial and error here to complete the assignment. So the first thing we're going to do is stuff we've done before. We're going to config T, and we're going to set an IP DHCP pool. Oops. And we're going to call it let's make it all caps, VLAN 10. All right. Now that's the pool that's going to service VLAN 10. It in and of itself has nothing to do with VLAN 10, except I've named it that. Right. So network. If Kozman could spell today. And wow, having a hard time today. All right, so my network's 192.168.1.0. It's a /24 because I'm using all 24 bits in the subnet mask except the first 24 bits and leaving the last octet as 0. Right. Let me see here. We're not going to do DNS. We're not going to do default gateway because there's no router. So that's all I need. That's my network. So I've defined my network. Let's do excluded addresses. I need at least one address for the switch that's going to act as sort of the main big switch, right? The one all traffic goes through, and that's this switch we're walking on right now with switch 0. So let's do I don't want it giving out that 1.1 address. I'm reserving that for this switch, for VLAN 10, right? So now we're in there. So now I want to do int VLAN 10. I'm creating an interface called VLAN 10, right? It's a virtual interface. Doesn't map to a physical jack on the switch. It is a virtual local area network interface. Just created it out of thin air and called it number 10. Right? So now that's the designation for that VLAN. So I have that interface. I'm going to give it an IP address just like I would an interface on a router. So now I've given that VLAN 10 an IP address, right? Simple as that. So let me exit this, and also could have typed end. And let's do show run. All right. So now there's my run. So I have an IP excluded address. I have my DHCP pool working. It's called VLAN 10 again. I'm using that VLAN 10 name because it's a way of me marking that, hey, this is the pool that's going to service VLAN 10. It, in and of itself, has nothing to do with VLAN 10. All those interfaces, and lo and behold, here's a new interface. There she is, right? So notice this one too, interface VLAN 1. It is currently in a shutdown mode, right? VLAN 1 is the default VLAN. For any Cisco switch that you open up and plug in, all the ports, all the interfaces are VLAN 1. I've created a new VLAN called VLAN 10, right? And it's gotten an IP address that I assign to it. Simple. That's it, right? So now we'll get out of this. So let's give this VLAN some work to do. Let's assign it to an interface. So let's do a config T here. And we want to select a particular interface. So interface FA0/1. So the very first port on our switch. So that very first physical jack, FA01, is what we're dealing with right now. We're going to assign it to a VLAN. First of all, we have to set the switch port mode, which means how do I want this interface, this jack, to behave? So I'm going to start with those two words, switch port, referring to the port on the switch. Mode, how do I want it to behave? And I want it to have access. Access to what? Access to whatever VLAN I assign to it. Right? So now we're going to say, switch port access VLAN 10. Right? So now suddenly we got a message. VLAN 10 changed to state to up. Why? Well, because we've assigned a switch port to it. So suddenly VLAN 10 goes, oh, I have something to do. Great. I'm assigned to switch port, FA01. So let's take a look at our show run and see how that changes things. And there she is, right? So now Fast Ethernet 01 is assigned to that VLAN. It is now a part of the 192.168.1.0 network. That's the only network it's assigned to. That's the only one it's allowed to take part in. I've segmented my switch into two VLANs. VLAN 1, which is just anything that comes down the pike, and VLAN 10, which is just the 192.168.1.0 network. That's my VLAN. Right? So what if I want to change multiple interfaces? 48 port switch. I'm going to type 48 times assigned to VLAN. No. So there are shortcuts. So let's config T, and we'll do int range FA0/2 because we've already done one. And let's just go to, let's see, 24 ports divided by 3. Let's do 7. Right? So now notice int range FA0/2 to 7. It's saying, hey, you're now configuring an entire range. I'm configuring all those interfaces 2 through 7 to do whatever I'm going to tell it to do. And we're going to change the access mode, or the mode to access. And we're going to assign VLAN 10 to all those. So let's end. And let's do show run. And now, lo and behold, all of those switch ports, right, are now part of VLAN 10, 1 through 7. One I did individually, and the other 6 I did as a group, right? Easy. So now I'm on VLAN 10. That's it. So now any device that is plugged into any one of those interfaces should be associated with that network. So if I close this and take a look at my interface here, come on you. There you go. FA01. Let's see if this guy actually got an IP address. If I did my job right, it did, but I've been known to make mistakes. And lo and behold, there's my IP. So that machine did. Let's see what happens on the other ones, right? So let's take a look at this guy. Now they're plugged into, just to refresh, they're plugged into interface FA02. He should have gotten it too, right? So let's take a look, and they did, right? This one is plugged into, right? Oops, let me goof here. Boom. FA03. He's not getting an IP address yet. Let's see if we can force him in there. There it goes. He got an IP address as well. Watch what happens now. I'm going to take this guy. So 1 through 7 are VLAN 1. I'm going to plug him into 8. Right? I'm going to take this guy, and let's say VLAN 20 takes up 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Let's go up to 16. I'll plug him into 16. Let's fast forward a little bit here. I know this is off screen. You can't see it, but I'll fast forward. Now let's see if they get an IP address. Right? No. We'll refresh. Come on, Bubba. There you go. No, it's an PIP address. It will not receive an IP address from that DHCP pool because those ports are not part of VLAN 10, right? Now, for the other switches, we have to assign ports to different VLANs, same numbering scheme, 10, 20, 30, as the original switch. When we do that, they become part of that VLAN and then are allowed to communicate. But the problem is that we have several, let me close this, we have several switches connected at once, and each one has 3 VLANs on it. So that leaves us with something to do with our gigabit connection. So let's take a look. So gig 2 on switch 0 connects to gig 2 on switch 3. We need to make sure or allow all of those VLANs to go through that gig 2 port. If we don't, you'll never get transmission of the IP addresses. So what we're going to do is what's called trunk that port. So let's take a look at that. Control-C. Let's do config T. Let's do int gig 0/2, right? And let's say switch port mode trunk, right? So what we're doing is we're taking all those branches, all those VLANs, and we're going to combine them into one big trunk, okay? All the VLANs are allowed to go through that trunk. So gig 02 is allowed to transmit all of that information. No matter what VLAN it's in, it can exchange those packets, right? So there we go. And let's look at show run. And let's page down, and there we go. Switch port mode trunk, right? So once we do that, switch 0 is set up. Now we have to set up the VLANs on each of these switches. They don't need an IP address, just the VLANs. And we need to segment those switches, different ports, different interfaces into different VLANs, and make sure our hosts are connected to the right port. Once we do that, any host connected to VLAN 10 will get an IP address from switch 0. Any host that's not won't get an IP address, or will get an IP address from a different scope that we've set up. Okay, so that's the basics of setting up that first switch. Now we got to pick and choose what commands we use to set up these 3 switches and make sure they have identical VLANs as well. Right? I'm going to turn you loose on it and let you figure it out, but if you have questions, you know where I am.